This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Today we're spending the hour with Shane Bauer, Sarah Shord, and Josh Fatal. Their book, A Sliver of Light, 3 Americans Imprisoned in Iran, is just out. At first, Sarah and Shane were held in neighboring cells, and Josh was separate. Then the men were put together, and Sarah was held alone in solitary confinement. I asked them about their interrogations and whether they were tortured. We start with Sarah Shord.
Well, the interrogations, I mean, in the beginning we were hunger striking. I was completely disoriented, but I still had a hard time taking the line of questioning seriously because it was just a total farce. They were asking, one of the things they demanded of me is to draw a picture of the lobby of the Pentagon. And I said, I've never been to the Pentagon. You know, I've never even been to Washington, D.C. By this time, I've been there many, many times, but at that time I hadn't. And he said, but you're a teacher. You know, all educated people, all teachers go to the Pentagon. And if I didn't, at some level, know that, you know, I was in serious danger, I would have laughed out loud. But at the same time, it was, you know, impossible to laugh.
There were times that they asked me, one question I was asked was they listed several countries in the Middle East and asked me to name them in order of what country is most subservient to the United States to least subservient. They asked me what newspapers are controlled by the CIA, these kind of things. I mean, sometimes it just seemed like whatever was coming to the top of the interrogator's head, you know, he would ask.
And they wanted your passwords. They wanted to check your email. Yeah. Was this an issue?
You know, I initially refused in my first interrogation to give them my passwords, and then I was taken back to my cell and was in solitary confinement, and, you know, my head starts spinning immediately, and I, you know, think I'm going to be here, sitting here, as long as I don't give them this password. So the next time I saw him, I gave it to him immediately. And, you know, I didn't have anything to hide, really, you know. I mean,
you were a journalist, so you were communicating with people.
Yeah, and, you know, they also managed to kind of wrap that into the narrative of being a spy. You know, they asked me, how did I get in touch with, you know, defense think tanks in the U.S.? Not anybody can do that. And I would tell them, just go to the website, there's a contact button, you know, hit that button and you can send an email.
And Josh, the questions they asked you?
They were, you know, the main question, the one that I got every interrogation at least once and had to, was, what is your full biography? And it's kind of a tough question to answer in a few words, but that's what they'd ask. And then constantly ask, you know, what were you doing hiking there? So those are the 2 main questions. But for me, they seem to really be asking about my my heritage and any trips I took to Israel. My father's Israeli, and so half my family's in Israel, and they wanted to know what I did, who I met, you know, and it was just like, well, I went to, you know, Aunt Yael's house, and we drank tea, and then I ate hummus, so we didn't do anything. So, and then they'd give me like a list of names, you know, to sort of identify, and I usually couldn't identify any of them. They were names that to me struck me as quite Jewish names, but
did you say you were Jewish right away?
Originally, no. I mean, originally I didn't know what to say, and I just was like, I'm Christian. You know, I was just sort of scared and thought I just might as well hide that in the Islamic Republic of Iran. But again, their questions were totally, one of the first questions they asked me was, well, look, if you're really American, because they were accusing me of being French at the first stop, was, please spell supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. And, you know, and I was like, really, is it? So it was very disorienting at the beginning, but at a certain point that ended, and they, after 2 months, the interrogations sort of wound down, and they admitted that they knew we weren't spies, but it had become political.
Were there beatings, psychological torture?
Yeah, I mean, we could hear the beatings, but we weren't the object of those beatings.
You were considered high-value prisoners. Mm-hmm. Did you feel that protected you?
Eventually, yeah. I mean, I think we realized in the beginning I was afraid that we would be beaten, that I would be raped. I'd heard stories of women being raped in Iranian prisoners. But we soon realized that we were too valuable, that we were, you know, indeed like an investment for the Iranian government, that they were eventually going to cash in for some sort of, they wanted to look strong and defiant, the Iranian government, but eventually they didn't want to look cruel forever. So they would eventually let us go, and they didn't want us to be harmed.
And we used that to our advantage, you know, knowing that we're valuable. We felt that we weren't, you know, subject to the the same kind of things that a lot of Iranian prisoners were subject to. We were pretty sure we weren't going to be physically tortured. So we, kind of in a sense had some power, knowing that we could push for better conditions. If we went on hunger strike, they would worry because they didn't want us to come out harmed, like looking, like we had been tortured.
And solitary confinement is psychological torture. I was in solitary confinement for 410 days, and the UN says that anything over 15 days can cause permanent and lasting damage and constitute torture. There have been scientific studies that say after 2 or 3 days, your brain waves start to shift towards stupor or delirium. It reduces you to an almost animal state. I spent hours and hours crouched by the small food slot in my door, just listening for sounds, pacing compulsively, eating my food with my hands. And there were times that I screamed and beat at the walls of my cell. And what people need to understand is that this doesn't only happen in countries like Iran or places like Guantanamo. This is a widespread and prevalent practice in our own country. We have 80,000 people in solitary confinement on any given day, many of them for years, many of them for decades. And these are not the most violent prisoners. Some of them have done violent things. A lot of them are in for arbitrary reasons. There's no oversight. Petty prison infractions.
Describe what happened the day you thought you were hearing someone screaming.
Yeah, that was the worst breakdown I've ever experienced. I lost a sense of who I was, and I heard screaming, and it sounded, all I could think is I wanted it to stop, and it sounded far away, and then the doors of my cell burst open, and one of the guards came in and started shaking me, and I looked at her, and through her eyes I could see myself, and I realized that I'd been screaming, and I'd been beating at the walls.
And they were streaked with blood.
Yeah, my knuckles were bloody. That was a dramatic moment. The majority of time in solitary confinement is spent pacing, trying to stop repetitive thoughts that just play again and again, trying to calm your fears and phobias, and to focus on reading a book. When I eventually got books, I would have days where I'd read the same pages over and over again and understand nothing and get so frustrated I would just throw it at the wall.
Talk about the meetings you would have in the courtyard. This was your one moment, Sarah, in the day of coming out of solitary confinement. What was the courtyard called?
Havohori.
Which means?
It means eating air. Yeah, my whole life was oriented around those visits. I would plan my entire day just counting down the minutes with an activity to fill every hour, every minute until it happened. And then as it got closer and closer, I would get more and more nervous and agitated and always afraid that somehow it wouldn't happen. You can never let your guard down. You're always hyper vigilant. And there would be days where, because of weather or random reasons, they would refuse it. And I'd start pacing my cell and wringing my hands together, crying sometimes, just because I was anticipating the one relief I had. And we made the most of that time.
How long would you have together?
Oh, it changed. In the beginning, it was only a half an hour a week, and then it was a half an hour a day, and eventually an hour a day. At the very end, it was 2 hours a day. And I think specifically I have the UN to thank for that. The Special Rapporteur Against Torture demarched the Iranian human rights government about my case, and officially solitary confinement is 22 to 23 hours alone a day. So I think they tried at the very end to get me out of solitary confinement, but according to the UN, 22 hours a day is still solitary confinement. So that time was often really difficult for me to come out of my numbness and connect with them. It was hard to make eye contact. Sometimes I just wanted to stay in my own little shell, in my own, box. But Shane and Josh would draw me out. They would make me laugh. They would make just special moments happen again and again. And it brought me back from the edge of sanity countless times.
Before, it was Josh and Shane in one cell, and you for that long haul in solitary confinement. When you were side by side, you actually managed to get out of your cell one night. Yeah. Explain.
Yeah.
Well, there was one night that I think one of the guards was sick, and so the section that we were held in, there was only one guard, and there were female guards in that section. They actually put me in the cell next to Sarah in the female part of the prison, but since the men would always come up and bring me food, one night they left open the little door on my cell, the little window, and I reached down and the key was in the door and I could open it. So I late at night opened the door and kind of peeked out, and they were still out there, and there was a vent between mine and Sarah's cell, and I said to her, just kind of jokingly, what would you say if I said I could sneak into your cell through this vent? And she said, I would tell you to do it immediately. And then I said, okay, I'm going to do it. And I was serious, and she was kind of like, wait a second, I don't know if you should do this. This is kind of crazy. But we waited late into the night until the guards were sleeping, and I snuck out of my cell and went into her cell.
Yeah. And of course it was, amazing to be, we'd been talking through event for the majority of days for weeks and weeks, but hadn't seen each other. And of course it was wonderful to be able to touch and have physical intimacy. But it's also being able to get around the restrictions imposed on you as a prisoner. All prisoners do this. You'll spend every waking moment coming up with a plan on how to beat them, how to get around their insane, horrible control. And that's how you resist. That's how you stay sane and how you stop from becoming institutionalized.
It was hard to smile reading A Sliver of Light, but when you both went back to your rooms and you found you were wearing each other's pants, I have to say. What did that mean to you, that moment, since you were feeling so isolated, alienated from your own selves, let alone each other, to be able to get together like that?
Mm-hmm. It meant that they couldn't break us. They could never tear us apart. That no matter how long it was until we saw each other again, until we were able to touch like that, we would, nothing could break the bond between us. And
Sarah, talk about the moment when one day you saw Shane, but you didn't see Josh. At first, you were alarmed.
Yeah. I as much as I knew that it was good for Shane and I to have time alone together, the three of us were a unit, an unbreakable team, and I was always conflicted about whether or not Shane and I should have time alone because I wanted Josh there, and I thought maybe something had gone wrong. I was worried, but it definitely caught me off guard. It was an unusual place to be proposed to, but Shane is not a usual guy.
Talk about what you did, Shane.
I had decided while I was in solitary, actually, that I wanted to marry Sarah. We'd been together for a few years, and after she was taken away from me, it was very clear to me that I wanted to be with her for the rest of my life. But I had thought I would do it when we got out of prison. I didn't was an ideal place to make a wedding proposal. But we started getting a sense that Sarah might be released before us, and I didn't know when I would see her again. And so I made a ring, in my cell out of thread. It was one of many examples of kind of using what we had, to get by. And I didn't tell Josh what I was doing because I didn't know if I would go through with it, Whether I was in prison or not, I was still nervous, And I went outside and, gave her this thread ring and asked her if she would marry me.
I mean, it gave us something to hang on to. It gave us one guarantee that we would have a life together. And when you have absolutely no certainty and everything has been taken from you, it means a lot.
We're talking to Josh Fatal, Shane Bauer, and Sarah Shord. They've just written a book about their experience in an Iranian prison, their experience in solitary confinement, called A Sliver of Life, 3 Americans Imprisoned in Iran. Sarah, can you read your selection from A Sliver of Light?
Sure. I decide to ring for the guard and ask for my nightly shower. Nah, she says. Khar daram. I'm busy. I begin to pantomime, performing like a trained monkey, smelling my armpits and crinkling up my nose. Okay, enough, Sarah, quickly. I grab my towel, hastily tie my blindfold around my head, and charge down the hall toward the showers. I slam the bathroom door behind me and quickly begin undressing. I crank the hot water knob as high as it will go, steaming up the room like a sauna. Suddenly, I hear the door open in the small room next to the showers. I hear voices, then the door shuts. Is someone out there? A barred window is usually kept unlocked so we can vent excess steam. I quietly unlatch it, peering into the small courtyard, and a young woman stares back at me. Think fast, I tell myself. It's been several months since one of the guards has made such a slip. I grab the bars between us, bringing my face as close to hers as I can, and begin to speak. I, Sarah, American. Long time here, no freedom. I whisper in my ridiculous infantile Farsi. You please phone Mother Sarah. Sarah no spy. Sarah love Iran people. Sarah teacher, Damascus. Please you freedom phone Mother Sarah, okay? The woman looks straight at me. I know you, Sarah, she says in awkward but good English. I'm sorry, but I'm not free, and I cannot help you.
Talk about who she was.
I actually never saw this woman again. It was one of dozens of interactions I had with other political prisoners. Many of them were brief and much more brief than this. They would shout, I love you down the hall, or they would say, just wait, you'll be free, or give me information about my mother and news from the outside. One of the most profound and lasting interactions I had was with a woman named Zahra Bahrami, who was Dutch-Iranian. She was a dual citizen. And she was arrested during the Ashura protests, which was following the huge protests for human rights and democracy that exploded in Iran in 2009, shortly before we were captured. We thought that the green, it was often referred to as the Green Movement. We thought it was over, but the Ashura protests were huge and very intense, and there was a lot of violence and repression. People died in the streets, and the prison filled with new people, and Zahra was one of them. In the beginning, she would just call out to me, and I heard her crying, but I'd already been caught talking to other women, and I was terrified of being caught again, so I tried to block it out. One day I was sitting in the corner of my cell trying to read a book, and I heard a voice. I heard someone say, Sarah. And I didn't know if I was imagining it. I didn't know if it was real. And I looked around me, and there was no one there, and I heard it again, Sarah. And I realized that above my sink there was a vent, and I remembered how Shane and I used to talk through the vent. So I jumped onto the sink, and I was able to talk to this woman. She told me that she hadn't been allowed to see her embassy, that she'd been beaten at the bottom of her feet and tortured, and she was barely able to stand. And she said that she saw my mother on BBC, and that my mother was fighting for me, that the world was fighting for me. And that at that moment, the guard barged in and caught us, and she was transferred. I never thought I would see her again. But months later, she came back, and we were actually able to devise a clandestine way of communicating through letters. We would hide them in the bathroom trash. I had devised a small pen from a piece of metal, or it wrote like a pencil. And she mostly just said, Iranians don't hate Americans. I love you. We should meet in the Netherlands. We'll dance. We'll become best friends. The incredible thing about Zahra and so many of the women there was they taught me how to be a political prisoner. But they never charged her with her political crimes. They only charged her with the drug crimes. And she was executed months after my release.
You mentioned your mothers, and I wanted to play a clip from May 2010. This is after you were allowed, all of you, to meet with your mothers.
Our treatment is decent. It's really difficult being alone. Shane and Josh are in the room together, but I'm alone, and that's the most difficult thing for me. But I see them twice a day, so we have good food, and we have medical care, which is appreciated. And we're reading materials and television.
We hope that Iran can continue with humanitarian gestures like letting our mothers come by releasing us on humanitarian grounds.
There you are, Shane and Sarah, with your mother. Talk about that moment for both of you.
As amazing as it felt to be with our mothers, it also felt, like kind of a cruel gift. We were, they were essentially using us to show that they were, put us in front of the cameras and showed that they were treating us well by allowing our mothers to come and visit. And of course, we weren't going to turn anything like that down. We wanted to see them more than anything.
I now want to go to all of your mothers coming into the studio here in New York soon after they saw you in Iran. First, you'll hear Nora Shord, then Cindy Hickey, then Laura Fattal.
You know, my main goal to go there was to fill them with hope, let them know what's happening here, and bring them home, which we didn't get to do.
Nora, can you describe seeing your children? Where were you? Did you go to the prison?
No, we weren't allowed to go to the prison. We were in a hotel in Tehran, which is, I think, close to the prison. So the kids were brought there. They did not know we were there. So when they walked in this room, I'm sorry, they were just completely shocked to see us. It was really overwhelmingly emotional for us. I mean, for hours, we didn't want to let go of these kids. We couldn't stop crying. I mean, it was like very difficult. Every time we think of the images again, this happens to us. I'm going to speak for myself. It's very hard to forget what we went through.
This has been going on since October. We have heard the words espionage and we've heard the words prisoner swap from October. The kids were taken the last day of July. So it is not news. It arrives, it disappears, it comes forward, it disappears, and nothing has come of it.
That was Laura Fattal and Nora Shord and Cindy Hickey just after they had returned from Iran. I want to jump forward to when you were released. How did you ultimately get out, Sarah?
Well, I give a tremendous amount of credit to our families and friends in the campaign, the really brilliant strategy they devised. Our story so easily could have fed into the animosity between the U.S. and Iranian governments. You know, the total breakdown in diplomacy was the reason that we were being held in the first place. But our families upended that narrative. They again and again made it clear that Iran is no enemy to us, nor is Iran an enemy to the American people. And my mother devised a brilliant strategy with the support of everyone else to really push my health issues. And after that visit, she knew that I had no health problems. The Iranian government knew that I had no health problems. I had concerns that were never addressed. But my mother knew that she could use that as a way for the Iranian government to save face, for them to let me out without looking weak, without looking like they were giving into U.S. pressure. But of course, what they were really giving into was international pressure.
Let's go to that moment in 2010, shortly after you were released from prison in Iran. This is one of your first statements to the media, Sarah.
I know how much effort has gone into this, and I'm extremely grateful. I feel myself I have a huge debt to repay the world for what it's done for me. And my first priority is to help my fiancé, Shane Bauer, and my friend, Josh Fattal, to gain their freedom, because they don't deserve to be in prison anymore.
So there you are, right near the airport as you're about to leave, and saying ultimately that you wouldn't feel free until Shane and Josh were free. Talk about your organizing over that next year and what people did and the countries involved in your release.
The only way that I could in any way justify being free, I didn't want to leave without them. I hated every minute of it. But the only way I could justify it is that I knew I could make a difference, that I believed I could make a difference, and I could get them out sooner. And I worked very closely with the Omani government. Later, I was able to enlist both the Iraqi government and the Venezuelan government, which is both amazing stories in and of themselves.
Well, tell us quickly, for example, Oman, which was so pivotal to your release, as well as Shane and Josh.
Well, Oman was involved from the very beginning.
Why Oman?
They play a very important role as mediators on many issues between the U.S. and Iran. They play an important role in the Middle East, and they knew that this is not going to be good for either country. And Oman has been very involved in the nuclear deal, the recent historic temporary agreement between the U.S. and Iran.
Do you feel this negotiation paved the way for the current negotiations?
Well, we do know that the same envoy that advocated for us and paid our bail and worked on our behalf for years, he arranged high-level meetings between U.S. officials and Iranian officials on Omani soil. And those meetings started as a platform to talk about our case, and then that opened doors for the nuclear negotiations.
How much was paid for your release?
$500,000 for each of us.
And so then $1 million to get the two of you out about a year later. I wanted to go to Josh and Shane addressing reporters at the news conference in 2011 in New York. It was quite amazing to see the three of you there. These your first comments since being released.
It was clear to us from the very beginning that we were hostages. Hostage is the most accurate term because, despite certain knowledge of our innocence, the Iranian government has tied our case to its political disputes with the U.S. Thank you.
We will always regret the grief and anxiety that our fateful hiking trip led to, above all for our families. But we would like to be very clear. This was never about crossing the unmarked border between Iran and Iraq. We were held because of our nationality.
The scene of you before that at the airport in Oman when you greeted your families and Sarah and Shane, you were together again after a year. What was that moment like?
It was like being shot out of a cannon. I mean, Josh and I, the doors opened, we ran down the stairs. Just to see the people that we had thought about every day there, to see Sarah there looking so strong, you know, she looked like a free woman. The last time I saw her, looked like a prisoner, you know, and it was just amazing to be there, to embrace them, to breathe fresh air. It was the best day of my life.
Shane Bauer, Sarah Short, and Josh Fatal. Their book, Sliver of Light, 3 Americans Imprisoned in Iran, is just out. When we come back, they talk about what they've dedicated their lives to since their release from prison. Stay with us.